You asked, we're answering.
I'm Devin,
I'm Kevin.
and there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Another question that we get asked a lot is, how do I tell what the oil temperature is on my bike? And that's because for over a decade now, Harley has not given any gauges to show pressure or temperature on the bike. And of course, because we're very focused on measuring the two important temperatures on these Harleys, which is the oil temperature is one temperature, and then the engine head temperature is another. A lot of people ask, how do we measure the oil temperature? And I've used the Harley analog dipstick gauges and the Harley digital dipstick gauges, and but for the last few years I've been using the Jess Customs analog dipstick gauge, and there's some other options out there, and I think Devin's going to talk about those.
Yeah, I'm currently using the Harley digital one, but there's some issues with those long term, especially. It just doesn't work sometimes. I have to clean it, but I really like the one you've got. I'm going to actually end up purchasing one of them. But other ways that you can do that is like on our universal oil filter relocation, there's actually an 1/8 inch NPT hole at the top of it. And it's usually on the left side down tube of the bike, right, fairly visible from the rider position. And you can actually just, take that plug that's in there out and just directly put a analog gauge right there for either pressure or temperature.
Not both, though. You have to do one or the other.
If you're going to use that one port, in theory, you would only be able to do one. Mm-hmm. You can get creative, though. I mean, in theory, you could be able to put a T there and get creative with some fittings and have two of them. As long as they get the oil to them, and you can monitor pressure. And
then you were mentioning to me earlier is that you can also just find a hose and put a T into that.
Well, if you're not using the universal oil filter relocation, but using the non-universal one that puts it under the passenger floorboard, then you can actually run like your outlet from the engine going to the filter. You can just get like a T fitting to go there and put a sensor anywhere, and then you can run that sensor. We don't support that, and we don't actually sell one. There's many options out there. Like Dakota Digital, for example, is one that you could do that with. But in that routing process, it's really nowhere convenient to just put a digital gauge. Not digital, but a analog gauge that you would be able to see very well. So. Mm-hmm. Usually in that type of setup, you're looking at more of a sensor style.
So what you're saying is you would tap into one of the oil lines, put a sensor in there. From the sensor, a wire would go to a gauge that you'd have to mount somewhere, your choice, somewhere on the bike, whether the cover in the lowers or somewhere on the dash. And so then that way you could you could do that with the temperature gauge and with an oil pressure gauge if you wanted to have oil pressure, like they all used to come with, but they don't anymore.
Exactly. And I haven't done this research yet. We may want to even look into it, but many people have their phones mounted on their handlebars. And there may be some sensors out there that can actually just Bluetooth to your phone and just have it on your phone right there. And then you don't have to permanently put something on your bike. I haven't, checked for that exact reason. It actually just come to mind right now. And maybe that's something that we can, research in the future as well.
So the easy thing is to use a digital or an analog dipstick gauge. But of course, you can't really see that when you're riding. That's there if you want to check when you're at a stop light or stop sign, or when you pull over the side of the road, and you can check what the temperature is. But if you want one that you can see, you can do it it's just a matter of buying a temperature gauge that would thread into the universal oil filter relocation. And that wouldn't be too horribly expensive. Like the Dakota digital gauges, to buy that setup, I mean, you're talking in, I think, the $1,000 to $1,500 range is what the Dakota digital setup costs. And you get more gauges than just the oil temperature, but the oil temperature is one of them. And then, of course, the more complicated one is a sensor and a gauge where you're going to have to start cutting and putting that in yourself. So we've just opted because we don't need to know our oil temperature all the time. We mostly monitor it for testing when we're testing new parts. And once we get our oil temperature where it's good, we don't really need to look at it that often. So that's why I just stick with the Dipstick. We hope you found that information interesting and useful. We're going to have more of these short FAQs that Devin and I are going to be doing. So hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, so that when we come out with the next one, you'll know about it.
And y'all ride safe out there.